Hi, my name is Winsley, and welcome to my Age of Wonders 4 video talking about how many action points summons come into battle with. This one, if I use the spawn hatchling, is going to come in with 3 action points, but it doesn't tell you that in the tooltip. And if I go over to this unit and I use the create summon Devastator Sphere, this guy will come in with a single action. And planning around that kind of interaction can be tricky when the game doesn't tell you how many action points they will come in with. Some of the things do tell you what you will start with. For example, if we go to call forth Avatar of Chaos, this actually says that you will spawn in your ruler with a full set of action points, meaning they get 3 actions and that they can get a triple attack on an enemy if you say wanted to, but it's not information that is presented to you for every ability that brings in units that gets actions. So I set aside some time this week to not only create an Excel spreadsheet of all the things that summon in units, but of all the things that add actions to the map. So things like raise undead, which one of my guys has access to over here. This one sometimes brings in units with 3 action points and sometimes brings in units with a single action point. So knowing how that works and when that works is going to be very helpful for combat. So yeah, we're going to explore that topic in this video. Okay, now that we've gotten the basics out of the way, we're just going to move through this Excel spreadsheet in the order that I set it up. I tried to put the things that I understood better and the things that come up a little bit earlier in the game near the top of the spreadsheet, and things like Monstrous Rebirth, things that come into play much later are going to appear later in the Excel spreadsheet. We've got that stuff I want to say near the bottom here. But yeah, let's get back to the top of the spreadsheet where it says the primal summon spell basically gives you 3 actions. This one has a couple different variations. If we look them up here in the in-game encyclopedia, we can discuss the differences briefly. The Conjure Primal Crocodile gives you a melee unit, which is able to do more damage for each previous attack that it took on that same hex. So if you're able to get 3 attacks, you're able to do a lot of damage through the thrashing mechanic. And if you're able to apply disease to that unit, then you're going to deal even more damage than if it was just getting bonus from the thrashing modifier here. It's one of my favorites. I feel like in general this one does the most damage, but can be countered more easily than say the Sylvan Wolf. The Sylvan Wolf has a attack that does more damage when the target is surrounded by your own unit. So if you have friendly units standing next to a target, you'll be able to do more damage. Most of these guys have repeating melee attacks. The Conjure Primal Sabertooth has something else. He has a pounce which helps him get into position, as well as repeating melee attacks. And getting those melee attacks in the right position can be very, very valuable. So having the summon spell is super nice. This is also a melee strike. The Stormcrow's unique in that it's got a ranged attack that does damage to adjacent enemy units. The Mammoth is cool because it has a charge attack and the ability to freeze people in an AoE using a full action attack. These are fun units to bring into the battle, and knowing how they work can be very important for planning out your turn. Now, let's take a closer look at the Conjure Primal Crocodile. I only have access to that one because I'm playing the Mire Crocodile subculture, and that means that not only can I summon in using the spell, I can also summon in units using my Animus. He doesn't have the Fury of the Mire Crocodile yet, so one thing I could do is I could just use my heal to build up that Fury to get him to be able to summon in another guy, but this guy's positioning isn't as good as the summon that we summoned in directly behind this orc, and who can get 3 flanking attacks that will deal more than 42 damage. That's just what the damage preview is saying for the minimum amount of damage if like you didn't get any extra damage from disease or from thrashing, but we'll get extra damage from diseased and from thrashing here. As you can see, this one summon is able to almost take out this tier 2 unit in a single round of attacks, and he still has 2 more rounds of the battle that he can stick around for. Now, before I forget that I set this up, let's go ahead and summon in my crocodile here, who will have, as you can see, 3 actions. Will be able to move forward and say finish off this guy if I wanted to, or I could run him super far forward and get him close to the enemy this turn. That's quite a nice utility off of a ability that adds a second unit to the battlefield, because not only will this guy be around for um, 2 more turns after this turn, so will this guy. He'll be able to attack, and while this isn't on a cooldown like it used to be, it is once per battle. I do think it's generally very efficient, and I'm a pretty big fan of the Animist. It's a relatively strong tier 2 support unit. A lot of the tier 2 support units operate quite differently, and I'm a pretty big fan of bringing in units that can make attacks on other enemies and draw the attacks of other enemies. It's just generally very efficient across the board. Now, getting back to the Excel spreadsheet, you can see I have a column here for the cooldowns that are associated with these abilities to bring in units that have actions, like the restore revive ritualist skill that can only be used every 2 turns. Whereas when we think about a spell, the limitation here is you can usually only cast 1 spell per combat turn, unless you have overchannel or something like that that can let you cast 2 spells in a turn. And then in a way, it's kind of like there's no cooldown there. You can just keep casting in spells that bring in units that bring in actions that allow you to move very efficiently on the battlefield. And when we look at the Animist ability to summon in, that is a once per battle thing, so it only happens once. So no cooldown associated with this ability in my Excel spreadsheet. And some of the things they keep actions from before, like the cryptblade and Monstrous rebirth. We haven't mentioned that earlier, but I did want to mention why there is a column here for actions being kept from a different unit, or being referenced from a different unit, to figure out how much the new unit will come in with. Most of these summons don't interact with a reference unit, but a few of them do, and I did want to point that out quickly before we move on to the hero staff, which works pretty much the same way as the animus summon ability and the primal summoning spell. The ability here actually is more like what the animus needs, because it does require that you build up some charges of fury of the primal animal, whatever primal animal you're playing as. We can do that pretty easily by using the same strategy we used earlier, just walking this guy over and um, not using the ability for the heal, but rather to build up the charges. And yeah, this guy was the guy with the summoning staff. One cool thing about the summoning staff is you can have your ruler start with this, or you can recruit heroes that have this staff that can summon in the primal crocodile. But yeah, it's a little bit tricky to get up and running, because you do need to spend some time, some actions getting these charges. You can get them from just simply attacking the enemy, but the other summoning guys are going to be slightly more accessible. But at the same time, I really like how early you can get this strategy up and running. The next spell we're going to talk about is the Conjure Tentacle spell, and this one is pretty interesting because it comes from a tier 1 tome, and it's kind of similar to the Animate flora that comes from a tier 2 tome, but I think the Conjure Tentacle may be one that you actually see a little bit more in combat because of its general utility and accessibility. Let's put this down for a second, but I don't want to forget that this guy's going to be a mobile. That's a really important thing I noticed when I was putting together this Excel spreadsheet. So when we summon this in, we're going to make sure we don't put it right next to one of those wargs, and we show that he isn't able to move. Unlike the Conjure Primal Crocodile, which has 3 actions and the ability to move, the Conjure Tentacle is going to summon in a guy with all around awareness. Yes, that's great. He can't be flanked, but he can't move. He's just kind of immobile and stuck here. He's here for 3 turns, so if the enemy can just simply move away from him without getting constricted, then this summon, I would say, is a lot less valuable. It just kind of keeps them from being able to move back into that general area. Another interesting thing to note here is this costs 30 mana and 25 casting points, which is a little bit more than what the Conjure Primal Crocodile costs. This costs 45 mana and 30 casting points. But I think that is because the developers were finding that people really liked the Conjure Primal summons, and instead of trying to make them weaker, they just tried to make them cost a little bit more. So when you're trying to compare these summons in your head, try and keep that in mind, that this guy costs more, and you get slightly more utility because of that. Now, another reason that I put Conjure Tentacle up here and I didn't put Animate Flora with it is there are a lot of nature things that work quite similar to one another and are quite different from these general sources of summoning. And then if we compare the Conjure Tentacle to the other summons that we have here, all of them give you 3 actions. They have a 3 turn timer until the summon disappears, and there is no real cooldown associated with these guys. They're either a spell that you can keep using or an ability on a hero that can only be used once per battle. The next 4 summons we're going to talk about all work very similar to one another. There is one pretty big distinction on this summon. This tier 1 summon will not have the countdown associated with combat summons, and I think that has to do with the fact that this is tied to the tier 3 units abilities, and the other guys are getting them through hero skills. The hero skill ones are less permanent because heroes in general can do more than a tier 3 unit, and having this only be able to spawn a unit that's around for 3 units is going to feel worse on a tier 3 unit whose whole thing is they bring in units than a hero that you just happen to equip with the right thing. Now, if we go in here and we summon in this tier 1 spider, we'll see that he actually does have a timer associated with him. And if we were able to summon in a tier 4 with that guy, we would see that he does have a timer associated with him, just like how this ice spider has a 3 turn timer until he disappears. I did just pass a turn to show off that this guy can summon in a tier 4 spider that works pretty much the same way as the other ones that we've looked at. He does have a 3 turn timer on him, and one of the nice things about this one in particular that we just got is that he has a single action AoE that he can run forward and then use to try and freeze multiple units. That's actually very, very nice. Next thing we're going to look at is the Conjure Animal Infusion that you can put on your items, and this one is only actually a single action that is going to create a summon that lasts for 4 turns. But what's really interesting about this one is the summon isn't actually going to come in with 3 actions. This time it's only going to come in with a single action, as you can see here. Only a single action. It's going to last 4 turns, but in practice, that's pretty similar to just summoning in a unit a turn earlier, and then you don't have to spend the action next turn summoning in this tier 1 unit that's going to last 3 turns. You just need to plan a little bit more in advance. The next item on this list that we're going to talk about is the Wand of Resurrection, and I found that this one was actually working quite a bit differently than the Raise Undead interactions that I tested later on. The Wand of Resurrection seemed to just say no matter what the unit had before they died, they're going to come back with a single action if you use this ability on it. And as you can see over here, there's no cooldown associated with it because it's once per battle. There is no turn timer on it because this isn't a temporary summon. This is something that is gonna stay in the battlefield until it runs out of health. And if it's alive at the end of the battlefield or at the end of the battle, then you get to try and keep it. Unlike these non-vital summons that we've been mostly looking at. Okay, now let's just take a minute to show off the interaction I was just describing. If I kill off this unit that had 3 actions and I come in here and I revive it, we'll see that he only has a single action. Yep. And if I just take this guy, put him in defense mode and remove him this way, we should be able to revive him to show off that once again he comes in with a single action point. So pretty cool that that's the way that works. Pretty different from the other stuff too. The next thing we have in our list here is the upgraded restoration ritualist skill that revives dead units. And the really interesting trade-off here is that the revived units come back with 0 actions, and this ability is on a cooldown, which means that if you're able to afford to just sit where you're resurrecting unit is for a little bit, you can get a lot of value out of this skill, but it's going to take a bit of time to build up that value. And when you do resurrect a unit, it means that they're not going to be able to move around the battlefield, potentially closer to where the actual fight is occurring on the battlefield. Let's just take a second to showcase that this unit right here with a single action, if he gets killed off, it doesn't matter if he's got a single action, 3 actions, or no actions. He will come back with no actions when we use this skill, which is, I think, a pretty interesting trade-off. The next thing we have here is the cryptblade, and for those of you who don't know, this is a very strong item that you can get from the Shadow Empire skill tree. If you take, I think it is like the 3rd or 4th one, you can get the cryptblade, which will turn enemies that you kill into zombies, and it is a free action that does a pretty decent amount of damage. If we were to try and target this one who is frozen, what's going to end up happening is he'll come in with no actions. He'll have 0 actions. Whereas if I try and kill this one, he'll come in with 3 actions, and that's very strong. Being able to turn an enemy into a friendly unit that can act on that turn means that you may be able to pick up other kills that you otherwise wouldn't have. And even if you're not able to pick off kills, applying decaying on valuable targets is quite nice because it denies the ability to heal up that unit on the enemy's turn. And as I said earlier, if I use Cryptblade on this frozen unit, the zombie that we get will not have any actions when they spawn in. They aren't frozen, but they don't spawn in with any actions, which is pretty interesting. The next 3 things we have here are all pretty similar to one another. The Conjure Lesser Spirit that you get from the Ritualist tree and the Conjure Greater Spirit are actually incredibly similar to one another, whereas the Summoner one is fairly similar to them but has some unique differences. If we just close this down, we can take a closer look at this dragon who has the lesser summon. This is going to leave us with an action after we summon in a guy. Pretty good. That means my dragon, if he wanted to, could summon in the astral ward, and then this one works the same way. It summons in a higher tier elemental who also comes in with a single action, just like this guy comes in with a single action, and he's around for 3 turns. Same with the greater summon. This guy's gonna come in for 3 turns, and he's gonna only have a single action on his first turn, which almost makes it like they don't get to use their first turn out of 3. But I think in general, adding bodies to the battlefield is very useful, and having an action left over to either put you in defense mode or use other actions is quite nice. Now, if we go here, we're not able to actually use this until we cast a spell. So we actually have to wait until the next turn of combat to activate this, and then that summon will be the only one that can come from the spirit summon thing. Until it disappears or it kills, you won't be able to use this ability, which is a pretty special cooldown effect. I don't know of any other cooldown effects in the game that work quite like this, so it is something that you want to keep in mind if you're going for the summoning strategy, specifically with the mystic summoner subculture. One important thing to note here is the type of spirit that you get from the spirit summoned dormant will depend on the types of spells that you have available to you. Right now, I only have Mark of Invulnerability and Conjure Astral Ward, which both are astral affinities. So when we use that, we're only able to get in our um, lesser storm spirit, and he's going to work pretty much the same way these guys do. They're going to come in for with a single action point, and they're going to last for basically 3 turns, and I can use this ability again later on in the fight. One important thing that's really easy to miss here is this has a cooldown of 3 turns, which means after this guy has disappeared, or after he gets killed by the enemy, you should be able to bring more of them into the battle, so long as the battle goes on long enough for you to take advantage of that interaction. All right, before we move on to the rest of the Excel spreadsheet here, I wanted to just mention that I've changed the format here a little bit. I'm going to try and move through these a little bit quicker, and I've made it so the Excel spreadsheet takes up less room, so hopefully I don't have to keep moving it down. And yeah, let's move into our undead summons now. We have the ability to summon in undead units using the item and a hero ability that you can get for the ritualist tree. The hero one is slightly better than the item one. The item one requires full action. In order to activate it, requires all 3 of your action points to be dedicated towards reviving an undead unit or turning in a non-undead into a zombie. And I found that the results that you get in terms of action points actually depend on the target. If the target was undead and you're reviving them, then they come back in with a single action point. Whereas if they were not undead and we revive them, then they come in with 3 action points. This is the item one, whereas this is the one that you get for the ritualist. It has a cooldown of 3, whereas this one is once per battle. So there is some distinctions there, but I found that they more or less work the same way. So if we come in here and we bring back the warhound, what you'll see is we have a decaying zombie. And while the decaying was a limiting factor on the cryptblade, I didn't mention it because it was a bit different than everything else. But this guy, he doesn't have a turn timer until he disappears. He has until his HP runs out, which, because he has inherent decaying, is something that will happen if the battle goes on long enough. Right now he's going to lose 10 HP at the end of this turn, which means he's got basically 5 turns to do what he wants to do. And as you can see here, he's got 3 whole actions, which, as I mentioned earlier, is quite different than when you try to revive an undead unit. This zombie unit will work the same way as any undead unit. Doesn't matter if they've got the decaying tag or if they're a higher quality undead unit. If they die, then when they revive, they're only going to come in with a single action point, because I believe this is for balancing reasons. If you revive the higher tier undead units for just a single action at the edge of your movement range, I could see that getting a little bit carried away with some of the tier 3 and tier 4 units that have that undead tag. But it's still quite powerful to bring back zombies with a single action. You just need to keep that in mind when you are trying to get the most out of your action points in this undead interaction. One interesting thing I noticed when I was researching this topic is that if an enemy doesn't have action points, if they're gilded, stunned, or have a status effect like frozen, and you kill them and then revive them, they will actually get an action point, which is pretty cool because a lot of the other things that reference a target that was on the field will keep their action points. So this can be a little way to get some efficient action points on the battlefield using the undead summon interaction here. One interesting thing I just noticed is that this zombie came in as a decaying zombie that is going to lose HP at the end of the turn, whereas in my notes I had it saying that he would come in as a regular zombie. So I went back and retested this. It seems like if the warg had been gilded, for whatever reason, it has this debuff associated with it and it created a decaying zombie. And when I went through the exact same motions, he came in without the decaying tag. As you can see here, the warg is not gilded, and when I kill him with this crow and try to revive him, this time he'll come in without the decaying tag. He's just a regular old zombie like the one that spawns in if you have the ritualist skill. Dark Ritual is one of my favorite abilities in all of Age of Wonders 4, and right now you can get access to it through hero classes. I believe the Rituals class and maybe one other will have access to the Dark Ritual skill. They just added the Spellblade and the Death Knight classes, so I don't know how those two work off the top of my mind yet. But getting back to Dark Ritual, this is really good once you are able to start removing a few enemy units from the battlefield, or even after a few of yours start to die, because then you can get more guys on the battlefield like so. We just need to be close enough to the dead units to bring them back as decaying zombies, and that while they only come in with one action point and aren't able to move around, they are able to attack the targets right next to where they spawn in, which is quite efficient. And the fact that they don't have a cooldown associated with them, they don't have 3 turns until they disappear, it means that they might be able to stay on the battlefield a little bit longer. So long as they don't run out HP, they're going to be able to block enemy movements and apply the decaying tag to other units, which is incredibly helpful because decaying means that they can't regenerate and they can't heal HP any other way until the decaying tag is removed. The next undead summon we're going to talk about here is how Soulbound has a 30% chance of creating a decaying zombie when you kill an enemy who has the Soulbound tag, and we can apply it actually with this uh, signature skill upgrade. The exhume undead creates a unit and applies soulbound to the guys in an AoE. This unit actually comes in with 3 actions, and I found that if I kill off this unit, I do get the soulbound to trigger. There's only a 30% chance of this to go through, so it isn't something you can count on, but being able to get another unit on the battlefield even when they don't have any actions is quite nice, especially when you consider that the source of this came from an ability that also spawns in units, and a lot of the things that apply soulbound also apply damage. So it's a very efficient way to get another unit on the battlefield. This guy is decaying. It seems like a lot of the undead stuff creates decaying zombies, unless you are trying to revive a undead unit. That I think it's going to apply the decaying zombie tag to the unit that spawns in. And next thing we're going to talk about is how dragons can create decaying zombies when they kill off units using the dragon transformation. If we just take a second to look at this guy's attacks, whenever this guy kills a unit, it has to be the dragon. It will create a decaying zombie. If for example we had used this guy to attack that guy, he wouldn't turn into a zombie using the zombie transformation unless the dragon was the one to get the finishing kill, which we can set up pretty easily on this next turn. We just need to pass a turn to get there. But he's going to come in with 3 actions using the Shadow Dragon transformation, which is quite powerful. That means that you can kind of set up kills on other units using kills from other enemy units. So for example, if I take this unit in here and weaken him so that my dragon can get the kill, then we'll be able to use the unit that spawned in from that kill to attack on this other enemy unit. It's pretty cool that this guy not only has 3 action points, but the ability to move and attack on the turn that he spawned in. If the target is frozen or gilded or has its action points removed some other way, when you spawn them in, they actually come in with 0 action points. This actually does reference the action points that the target had before they died, unlike the zombies that you get from the soulbound effect. Alright, so the next set of summons that we have here are all relatively simple and come in at the start of a battle. The Zombie Keeper is something that we're not going to be able to see very easily with this up on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move the Excel spreadsheet for a second to show that Zombie Keeper is hidden underneath there, and Wyvern Keeper is just one more skill point and gives you a slightly better unit. A Wyvern is a tier 2, and the zombie is a tier 1. This is not a decaying zombie, so he'll be able to stay on the battlefield quite a while longer, and he'll be able to get healed, which is quite nice. But yeah, let's jump into a combat to showcase how those compare against the ones you get from the Eldritch Sovereign and from the crowbow. We have the crowbow on this guy, so we'll spawn in a crow from the ranger hero. We're going to spawn in a zombie from the ritualist hero, and then we're going to spawn in, I think, some fleshlings and some splitterlings on the Eldritch Sovereign. The Eldritch Sovereign gets the ability to bring in these guys at level 4, I believe. Whereas if you start with the, what's it called, the Umbral Disciples, then you'll get a ability to bring in a free unit through the Tyrant's Retinue ability. So we've got 4 units here. They all are quite similar in that they start with 3 actions at the start of the battlefield. But one important thing to note here is that the Splitterling has a countdown of 3 turns. The Fleshling does not have a countdown of 3 turns. The zombie does not have a countdown, and he's not decaying, so he's going to be able to stay on the battlefield quite a bit longer than these other ones that we got at the beginning of a battle. And then same with the Grimbeak Crow. This one doesn't have a countdown associated with it. You have to spend your starting item loadout to get access to this, so it's generally quite good. The other way to get access to the crowbows is to make them through the item forge, but that's relatively expensive and something that I generally wouldn't recommend. The wildsspeaker unit and the houndmaster unit work similar to one another in that they are all about bringing another unit into the battlefield, but the way the houndmaster does it is a little bit different than the way the wildsspeaker does it. The wildsspeaker uses a ability to conjure in a unit that lasts for 4 turns and has a lot of really nice abilities associated with that can either boost up that tier 1 summon or some higher tier animals. And I know a lot of people really like giving their tier 3 and tier 4 animals, I think, killing momentum through their wild speakers. Whereas the houndmaster, he just brings in a guy kind of like the crowbow who is on the battlefield until he dies. There is no timer associated with him. Like I mentioned earlier, the wild speaker, he has to use an action to bring this guy in. He's around for 4 turns, and I really, really like this ability that you can apply to other animal units. The wild speaker, while it can bring in another unit, I think that's less of a focus than on the houndmaster, because as you can see, the houndmaster, he is a archer. He's not about supporting other units, so the fact that it just brings in another guy kind of supports him in that it allows him to do more damage, whereas the wild speaker is a dedicated support unit. The next set of summons that we're going to talk about have to do with the nature affinity. There's 2 ways to animate flora. You can either use the Horn God's ability here, which has range 4 and a cooldown of 2 that creates a summon that's going to last for 3 turns. And then there is the spell Animate Flora, which is a lot easier to apply because you can go further away from your Horn God and go right next to an enemy unit to get a triple attack if, say, you wanted to. One of the important limitations for this one that the Conjure primal animals have is that you need to animate either trees or foliage in order to summon in this unit, regardless of if you're using the spell here or if you're using the ability on the Horn God. The nice thing about this Horn God's ability is he can actually move before using the action to summon it in a unit, and because the unit lasts longer than the cooldown on this is a pretty efficient use of a Horn God's turn. And if they aren't able to do anything then defense mode, I don't see why you wouldn't want to just bring in another unit for 3 turns to try and make it harder for the enemy to approach you. Now, the Horn God also has this ability to summon in living vines in a 1 hex radius, which is quite good because that can make it so that ranged units are locked into zone of control. And as you can see here, that was a lot of hexes that are now something that enemies can't move through without removing these guys from the battlefield. They don't have actions and they don't have attacks, but they do have retaliation attacks for when people try to move away from them. This says that I can use a full action next turn to try and immobilize somebody who's standing next to this guy. But the main thing they get is when people are trying to walk away from them, they can retaliate against the enemy and keep them locked in place. Now, there are two other sources of vines that we can use. One that I'm a pretty big fan of is the Vine Prison because it's pretty accessible. You get it in a tier 1 tome, Tome of the Roots, and then as you can see here, that's going to make it so that this guy is going to have a harder time getting other targets. He's probably going to end up attacking a vine instead of attacking a more valuable unit because he doesn't have better targets that he can get to easily in order to attack somebody else. He's going to have to try and get out of their range. Now, the other source that we're going to talk about here is the hero source of vines. If you get the Conjure Wildgrowth ability, you can make it so that it also spawns in living vines around the target. It only spawns in 3 living vines, so it's not going to be as many as what you get from the Horned God, but it's still pretty cool that it can bring in vines and an ability that does other things on top of just doing vines. This will also make it so that the enemies are poisoned and blind, and if we pass a turn here, you'll see that these guys are pretty locked into position. They're not able to get away from these guys. Yeah, and they're just going to end up wasting their time attacking here. Let's see where he goes. Is it because he was flying that he didn't have to worry? Yeah, I think because he was flying, he didn't have to worry about getting constricted by the vines. The next 3 summons that we're going to talk about here come from the signature skills. Once you get a hero or your ruler to level 12 and you have 6 Materium affinity, you can take the Awaken Earth ability, which creates a stone spirit that lasts for 3 turns, and this ability is on a cooldown of 2. The stone spirit's going to come in with 3 whole actions, which means you can summon in this unit really far away from your heroes, your rulers, and maybe the majority of your army so that they can lock down the enemy and act as a defensive tool for you. And that's quite a nice utility. When we compare that to what you get for the Master of Nature, the Call of Wild will give you 2 random tier 2 animals on that location from range 4, which means you can apply a lot of damage over the next few turns after you summon in these animals. But because it doesn't have a cooldown, I think in general you'll get more utility out of Awaken Earth in the most fights, and definitely in longer fights where you're able to summon in multiple tier 3 stone spirits. There is one more that summons in units. There is the shadow one, the exhume undead, which creates a tier 3 undead unit that lasts for 3 turns, and it also applies soulbound, which, like we saw earlier in the video, can allow you to bring in zombies. And by extension, this one is more like the Awaken Earth in that it has more utility over longer fights than the Call to Wild, but Call to Wild should allow you to do a lot of damage. The next 4 summons that we have here are all towers that cannot move. The Conjure Astral word is all about making it so that your existing units are harder to kill by attaching itself using this ability. It can do a warding link, making it so that damage sustained to the target friendly unit is just transferred to this guy. It comes in with the 3 actions that it needs to cast this ability, which is slightly different than some of the other towers. This one is going to last for 3 turns, unlike the Conjure Amplification field. That one doesn't have a cooldown associated with it, and a lot of the others attack at the beginning of their turn. So they don't start with 3 actions, but it's kind of similar to starting with 3 actions. Conjure Divine Beacon is similar to the Astral Ward in that it creates an immobile tower that lasts for 3 turns. This one says upon casting and at the start of each turn, friendly units in a 2 hex radius gain 5 temporary hit points and 5 morale. Since the summon lasts for 3 turns, this is going to be able to be activated 3 times, once on the turn that you use it, and then twice on the following turns after that. Now let's go ahead and actually use this so that we can see the 2 hex radius is applying to all of these guys. It gives them HP and morale, and as you can see, he doesn't have any actions to use this ability, but at the beginning of the next turn, it will just kind of happen. So it's not something that I actually get to interact with. Conjure Amplification Pylon works a lot like Conjure Divine Beacon and the Astral Ward because it creates something that is immobile that lasts for 3 turns. But what is different here is this is going to make it so that your spells deal more damage and so that you have an attack on a unit here that spawns in with no action. So he's not going to be able to attack on his first turn, but on the 2 turns that occur after that, he will be able to just do a little bit of damage from range 4. This unit also has a static shield, which is quite good, and a lot of people overlook the fact that you can stun enemies on their turn when they attack you using static shield, which lasts quite a long time. It actually will make it so that they can't attack on their next turn and they're not able to go into defense mode and do a lot of other things that they may want to do. So this, I think, is one that people may be overlooking more than maybe they should. This guy has 80 HP and 2 armor, 2 resistance, which is more than the Conjure Divine Beacon. The Divine Beacon has a little bit less HP, defense, and armor, which is actually better than what we get on the Astral Ward here. The Astral Ward only has 40 HP, 1 defense, 1 armor. This guy has 80 HP, 1 defense, 1 armor. This guy has, it looks like 90 HP and 2 armor and 2 resistance. I think it got 2 more from another source there when it got summoned in, because this guy is supposed to have 80. The other one, I thought I just saw it saying it's supposed to have 80 here. This one's supposed to have 60. Interesting. Yeah, it boosted up their HP quite a bit there. Now, before we move on to the Totem of Wild, I did just want to show what happens at the beginning of the next turn. This turret does attack the unit that is closest to it, which I don't feel like is indicated in the description anywhere. And one thing that I noticed after recording that last clip is I said that there is no timer on the amplification pylon, and as we can see here, there is. This guy has 3 turns that he is on the battlefield. And now we're ready to dive into the Totem of the Wild, which is probably the worst tower out of all of these towers. I'm sure there is a decent way to get some value out of this, but the fact that it only spawns in a tier 1 unit that occurs at the next turn, not the turn that you summon him in, means that you won't get a lot of value out of this other than people may want to target it. It does have 4 defense, 2 resistance, and it looks like 90 health points, which is, I'm pretty sure, close to what the totem is supposed to start with. We just go here, we can see that he's supposed to have just 10 less HP, but other than that, this guy is quite tanky and all about bringing in other units so that they can do the damage on future turns, not on the turn that he comes in. So if you're able to sit back and put one of these in front of your army, between your army and the enemy, then you might be able to get some decent value out of it. But I think in general, it's just not very good compared to the other things you could be using your casting points on. And yeah, only getting tier ones is really not that great value. If it even brought in a tier 2 unit here with full actions, I don't think that would be comparable to a lot of things that also cost as much mana or casting points as the Totem of the Wild. That is a lot of mana to be spending on just a couple tier 1 units in a fight, and a lot of casting points to be spending on that interaction as well. The Fire Giant has the ability to conjure in a runestone that acts very similar to the amplification pylon that we were just talking about, in that it has an attack that we're not in control of and it starts at the beginning of our turn, or it triggers that attack at the beginning of our turn. It's relatively weak as 2 armor, 50 HP, but one nice thing about this is on a cooldown too, so you can keep bringing in runestones and playing defensively if you want to. It's kind of like the Horn God's ability to animate flora that is on a cooldown too, and the summon lasts for 3 turns. And I like this interaction quite a bit. The ghost ship has a pretty powerful summon ghost ability that is a free action to create a tier 3 unit that lasts for 3 turns and can be used multiple times in a fight. Once this ability has been used, it cannot be used again until basically a non-summon, non-undead unit dies, and then that can only be triggered once per turn so that they don't just continuously keep summoning in free banshees for 0 actions. This is a very strong ability that makes it pretty hard to clear out water infestations. From what I know, I don't believe you can get the ghost ship as a unit in your army, so it's really just something that you need to keep in mind when you're clearing the map, but it is interesting and similar to these other ones that we have up here. This next unit, the Abductor, is one that you come across in the Umbral Abyss, so that can make it a little bit harder to clear locations that have the Abductor, but if you wanted to, you could try and mind control them using a Lightbringer or one of the many other sources of mind control that would allow you to recruit this unit after the fight. If you do get it, then you're going to have the ability to turn enemies basically into these units, the splitterlings. We're going to abduct this guy and then wait a turn to have him spawn in a splitterling randomly around him. Now he's got the satiated rift. He can now no longer move, and he heals a little bit while also spawning in a unit. I believe, yeah, it happens right here at the end of my turn. So you can already see him. He's going to stick around for 3 turns after he spawned, and this guy's kind of blocking the movement, unfortunately. So in order to get him into the fight in a meaningful amount of time, we're going to either need to move this guy, which is not ideal, to get this guy over here, or you basically don't get an attack in this turn. But I think in general it's a pretty strong interaction. It's just unfortunate that the abductor can't do anything while he's spawning in splitterlings, and that you don't get to choose where they appear, because this is probably the worst location it could have spawned in at, but it's still something I was able to manage with this map state. The next set of summons that we have here are the late game summons and the less common summons that bring in action points, like the Conjure Astral Keeper, who is a support unit. I don't have too much that I want to say about this guy other than he comes in with 3 actions, he lasts for 3 turns, and he's got some pretty cool abilities. I like the fact that he heals using this ability, and this ability is also a pretty strong heal. It is on a cooldown one, so you can only use that maybe once or twice, depending on if you use that on your first turn after you summon in this guy, and then you'd probably attack on the next turn and try and heal on his last turn. And if you don't have a good target to apply this to, you may as well heal a bunch of guys in an AoE. Summon Astral Reflection is a relatively strong summoning ability because it can make it so that you have other support units that can dispel effects in an area. Like the Nymph has a dispel that clears status effects in an area of 1 hex radius, and that is very nice to be able to just throw down when you need it. It also is interesting in that it always is going to bring in the unit with a single action point. It doesn't matter if I target a these guys are invalid targets. It doesn't matter if I target a guy with full action points or 1 action point. He's only going to come in with a single action point. Let's just take a second to try that again on a unit that has 0 action points. It's also worth highlighting the fact that I couldn't target my summoned in units and my heroes and mythic units is that's intentional because being able to duplicate hero abilities is very powerful, and being able to duplicate summons in the right position, say like a primal animal that's already getting flanking attacks behind an enemy, being able to summon in another one is it's super useful. But yeah, if we go ahead now and try to target this unit, we'll see that this guy, he comes in with a single action point, even though that guy had 0 action points. Summon Progenitor Golem is quite unique in that you unlock it by clearing a gold wonder and attaching it to either a city or an outpost. You won't be able to summon in Progenitor Golems in combat until you've taken that step, which is different because a lot of these come from research, not from clearing the map. If we summon in this guy, you'll see that he's a very strong unit. I'm not even going to put him next to the enemy because he comes in with the ability to make it so that he does damage across the battlefield to 3 random enemies and their adjacent allies. This is very nice. We're going to use this to hurt a lot of guys randomly. Oh, cool. The way that targeted it hit this guy multiple times. And then, of course, it has some other nice things like you can seal in strong units to make them so that they're not part of the battle until this unit disappears or is killed off. And attacking with breaching is not bad because I believe this is able to target adjacent enemies, not just the guy that you target. It's a very strong unit. Oh, and I almost forgot, this guy has a 3-turn timer associated with it, which is different from Astral Reflections. That one just created a copy of a unit until it is either removed from the battlefield or until the end of the battle. Monstrous Rebirth is one of the most interesting spells that we're going to be looking at today because it can create a unit that has 3 actions, 1 action, or no actions depending on what it had before you tried to turn the friendly unit into a warbreed. Right now, if we target this guy who has 3 actions, he'll be able to have 3 actions to move around the battlefield and try and get some flanking attacks or get a better position if he wanted to. But if this unit was, say, frozen, or if I put him in defense mode, then it works pretty much the same way, and the Warbreed will come in with 0 action points. The Treacherous Reflection spell is a really interesting one in that it can bring back units with either a single action point or no action point, depending on the state of the unit when you cast Treacherous Reflection on it. And it's also very similar to the Astral Reflection, but this one says that when the unit that was originally targeted with this dies, then the reflection dies. And this unit also gets the umbral tag. If we compare that to the astral one I think says it replaces the original unit when the original unit dies. So there is some similarity there, but there is quite a bit of significant difference between treacherous reflection and astral reflection. So as I mentioned earlier, if we target this guy who's frozen, this unit comes in with no action points. And if we target this unit, we'll see that the unit comes in with a single action point. He doesn't have 3, but he does have 1 action point to work with. Since I talked about Call Forth Avatar of Chaos earlier, we won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but it is worth mentioning that if your ruler is in the fight, then we're not able to use the ability. And Call the Titan of Earth works in a similar way, but he actually starts off with a single action and has no cooldown associated with him. He isn't there for only 3 turns, he's there until the end of the fight. If we go here, we'll see that sure he is a combat summon, but he's not going to disappear in 3 turns like a lot of combat summons that come from spells like this. Marked for Death is a very powerful spell that brings in decayed zombies on the turn that you use it and afterwards. At the end of the unit's turn, a decaying zombie will spawn next to them. So this is a great way to get decaying zombies all over the map. And these decaying zombies, they come in with one action point. As you can see here, he's got one action point, which means he's probably not going to be able to kill the target, but generally speaking, you probably want to let this guy summon in more zombies if you're spending the casting points on this interaction. Greater reanimation is another one of the undead skills that works differently based on if you are reviving an undead or creating a new unit. This one will create a corrupt soul unit if the unit was not already undead. Let's go ahead and look at how we can do that with this warhound here. This will create a corrupt soul that has no action points. This guy has no action points and was just created using greater reanimation. And now if I use the same spell, Greater Reanimation, on this zombie, we'll see that he comes back with a single action point. Battlefield Reanimation is a really strong spell because not only does it create a lot of actions for your side in the combat, it will destroy the corpses that the enemy may want to revive or interact with in a similar way to what you're doing here. Turning them into action points is very efficient, and we have one unit that is a friendly undead and one unit that is a friendly not undead unit here. Let's see what happens with them and their action points. So as we can see here, this one is getting no action points and this one is getting action points. When it created the zombie here, it got action points. When it revived this zombie, it did not get action points. I assume Mass Revive and Mass Rejuvenation work the same way. Mass Revive requires people have the Faithful tag, so um, I didn't actually go ahead and test that. We are seeing that this living unit was able to come back to life through Mass Rejuvenation, but it didn't revive my zombie, unfortunately. Unlike Mass Rejuvenation, Resurrect unit will bring back a unit with a single action. They won't have three actions, but they will have a single one, and we can use it on our zombie or our warhound. Let's just go ahead and bring back the warhound to showcase how that works. Now that we're getting pretty close to the end of the video, I'm going to move a little bit quicker through these. We do have some late game item forge effects that I want to go over after talking about the city siege summons and the domain things that bring units into the battlefield, like the golem mind, the fortress of vines, and I think gremlin ambushes. I believe those are all things that you can spawn in your friendly domain when you're taking a fight inside your friendly domain. Now, the Great Bombard Cannon is a pretty good siegecraft unit, but because it is a siege project, we can't bring any other siegecraft things into this battle. We can use soul siphons and unleash the warhounds with this, so we will, and let's just jump in and see what they get in the actual fight. Now, the Great Bombard Cannon, he's going to start off with no actions here, whereas I believe the Warhounds, they should be able to keep up with the rest of our guys. They should be able to move forward here on our first turn. And I'm curious if the zombies will be able to as well. They should be able to. We just need to wait a second for them to take their turns, and then, yep, there we can see all of our units can move and attack. Whereas the Great Bombard, he does start with actions, he just can't attack for that first turn. Okay, so I was remembering it slightly wrong, but it works out pretty much the same way. If he can't move and he can't attack, he's basically not got any actions for his first turn, and then afterwards he can deal damage in a 1 hex radius to um, a lot of units. It's going to be able to hit a lot of units and deal a lot of damage, applying sundering defense, and this is only on a cooldown 1. I think this is generally pretty good when we compare it to the other siege projects, but we kind of need to see it in action before we can make a proper assessment. So let's see, how much damage does this guy do when we get to do the Great Bombard attack? 30 damage seems like it isn't too much, but you have to keep in mind that he's going to be able to destroy obstacles with this and open up the ability for other people to get their attacks. Yeah, that's not bad. I like the fact that that applies sundered resistance. I don't love that I can't use that on my next turn, that it's on a cooldown 1, but I guess this unit does have a bit of defense, a bit of resistance, a bit of HP, so he should be able to stay alive for quite a while, doing these shots to make it so the rest of your army can engage more easily. If you choose to construct Devastator Spheres, you're going to get 2 of these units that when they attack, they just die. They blow up and they're gone from the battlefield. This unit has 3 armor, 1 resistance, only 60 HP, and a bit more movement than it used to have. I think it used to only have 32 movement, and now it's up to 48 movement, which allows it to engage a lot more easily. And one neat thing about this is I can just go ahead on the first turn of combat here, bring him forward, and I think blow up the walls here. Yeah, you hold down Alt in order to get this to work, but that's very nice utility to be able to get on turn 1. Of course, you don't get the same value that you would out of the Great Bombard Cannons, which will help you out in longer fights by applying attacks to units across the battlefield. They have range, I think it was 3 to 12, whereas this guy has to get right next to the enemy. An interesting consideration to keep in the back of your mind. If you choose construct onagers, which everybody has access to by default, then you'll get this unit, which works a lot like the Great Bombard Cannon in that it starts without the ability to attack, but it can attack from quite far away. I think it does half the damage without the ability to do sunder defense, so it's significantly weaker than the Great Bombard Cannon, but you can get it a lot earlier in the game, and I think it costs less to set up. But yeah, I don't think we actually need to show it attacking the walls. It's relatively weak. It's got 2 armor, 2 resistance, and 35 HP, so it's something that you can remove from the battlefield relatively easily. If you choose construct bolt repeaters, you'll get access to 2 of these units in your siege, and they're able to attack on turn 1 in an AoE for a pretty significant amount of damage. If you try to shoot relatively far away, the accuracy does go down, but I would say this is pretty reliable for the amount of damage that you're able to do from that range. It's got range 3 to 12 like the other siegecraft weapons that we've looked at. It's got cooldown 1 on its attack, and it doesn't have great defenses, but I think that it's a pretty interesting weapon for not only taking out the enemies, but also for attacking their walls and making it so that you can attack the enemies more easily. If you choose to construct Earth Shatter engines in a siege, you'll get 2 of these units, which are really unique in that they actually have the ability to move before they do their thing, which is not actually going to deal damage. This will make it so that all obstacles sustain damage, the units lose their defense mode and retaliations, and they become slowed. It doesn't matter if your friendly units get hit by this or enemy units get hit by this, it will slow them. And what I'm seeing here is it actually does quite a significant amount of damage to the obstacles. It doesn't seem to indicate how much damage is going on the obstacles, but it might just outright destroy them. That seems to be what I'm seeing with this unit. We are now ready to look at these 3 combat enchantments. The Golem Mine brings in a Iron Golem unit, the Fortress of Vines brings in vines, and the Gremlin Ambushers is going to bring in Gremlin Ambushers. The one that's different from the others, I would say, is the Golem Mine, in that it only brings in a single unit at the beginning of combat, and that unit is going to have 3 actions. So he can stay with the rest of the other units that you start the battle with. He won't be stuck behind the others because he only started with 0 action points. But this gremlin, see here, he has no action points, so he's not going to be able to keep up with everyone if we move them forward aggressively here. And the vines are similar in that they spawn in with no actions, but they're not supposed to attack. They're just supposed to keep the enemy in place and to distract them a little bit too. If they waste their actions killing vines, that makes it harder for them to come forward and deal with us. There is a cooldown of 1 on the gremlin ambusher and on the Fortress of Vines. And this is going to be basically for 5 turns, whereas this triggers once, I believe. Spawns it during the battle for each turn. Does it do it for 2 turns? It might do it for 2 turns. Let's take a second to actually see how long we get the vines. Is it just 1 turn or is it 2 turns? Yeah, just triggered. So it might be that we only get the vines once, whereas the gremlins keep coming in. I had to remind myself how this works because it's been a little bit since I set up these saves. But I'm pretty sure if we pass the turn here, we're not going to get any more vines. It may just be for that 1 turn. Yeah, I'm not seeing any vines appearing around here. So they're similar but different in meaningful ways. The last set of things here are item effects that you can either pick up from clearing the map and getting really good items that way, or you can craft really good items to get either the same effects or similar effects to what we have described here. One of my favorite items in the game is the Staff of Inioch, not only because it's a reference to the first game where that king, the Elven King Inioch, went evil, but I love it because of how useful it is. This Gravecall ability brings in zombies for the first 3 turns of combat, which is very, very powerful because those units will be able to take actions for a while until they run out of HP. And because they are decaying zombies, that will happen eventually. But I just generally think this is a really good item. We see it in games less often than when the item forge first came out and when the game was still relatively new and in development or in the earlier phases of development. But now they've changed it so that the items that you get from clearing the map can be a little bit more randomly generated. I believe you should be able to get the Staff of Inioch from clearing some of the higher level locations, probably the ones that are more associated with the undead or more likely to spawn in the Staff of Inioch, but I'm not entirely sure. There's also a really nice spear, or not spear, a nice lance that spawns in Lightbringers. It is only going to bring in 1 Lightbringer actually, not 3 zombies like the Grave Calling does. This summon is going to last for 3 turns, so there is that trade-off that you do want to keep in the back of your mind. But this is a different type of item entirely. If you can't equip this to any of your heroes, then it's not very useful. Same with the Grave Calling off of the Staff of Inioch, which brings us to the items that you can make. I made a couple items with the ability to spawn in more units, like this one right here is the splitterling infection. So if I kill off a unit with this effect, then it will spawn in a new splitterling unit. In fact, yeah, let's just take a second to do that. As you can see here, this splitterling is spawning in with 3 actions, which is quite a nice interaction for a hero item like this. We also have one that can summon in the umbral units, which I had on this guy, I believe, has the Umbral Abyss guys. They are, yeah, right here. Summon Umbral Demon, a random tier 2, tier 3, or tier 4 Umbral Demon unit will be spawned. I really love it when we get the tier 4 one, but it is a dice roll, so you can't really rely on it being any one thing in particular. And then I think I remember creating a sword that creates zombies as well. Yeah, this one has the infecting tag, which creates decaying zombies, which work like the splitterlings that I just showed off a second ago. And yeah, that's everything I had for this video. Thanks for sticking around for all of the information I had at the end of the video here. Until next time, have a good one.